let the records show that all board members are in attendance. Dr. Junman has a professional commitment tonight, so he is unable to be with us. And Stephen, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight it is our pleasure to introduce you to two of our students from our new Academy of Fine and Performing Arts, Sydney Cottingem and Tovi Alkema, and are among the 50 fifth graders attending our newest magnet school, which is made possible through our partnership with Springfield Little Theater and the Foundation for Springfield Public Schools. So Sydney and Tovial, would you come forward, please? And if you want to step forward here so the board can see you, I'm going to talk about your great accomplishments. Sydney is a leader in her community, and her teacher says that she is fearless about trying new things with confidence. She comes from a family of musical and visual artists who are thrilled for her to have the opportunity to build upon her skill set as a part of the inaugural Academy of Fine and Performing Arts class. Beyond her passion for the arts, Sydney is also a member of 2 competitive karate teams and is on top of her division. Tovial is a natural performer. Each day at the Academy, he is excited to explore his passion. He loves to entertain people and has performed all over the world. He is a drummer and enjoys acting, theater, and Broadway, which he wants to pursue when he grows up. Sydney and Tovial are joined by one of their teachers, Ms. Liza Gray, and their family members. If you're here to support these 2 wonderful students, would you please stand? We want to thank you for being here. So now we ask those who are able to please rise as Sydney and Tovial lead the Pledge of Allegiance. Whenever you're ready.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, guys. AFA students. That's right.
Take a photo here.
They didn't dance. That's how they introduce
Huge smiles behind
That's right.
those masks. We want to be in the photo.
Thank you guys for being with us. Thank you.
We'll now continue with honoring excellence for this evening. Just a few days before the last school year ended, one of our teachers was informed that he was selected for the Fulbright Teachers for Global Classrooms. This is a professional development education program sponsored by the United States Department of State and the J. William Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board. Mr. Matthew Bills is with us tonight. Would you please come forward, Mr. Bills, so that we can celebrate this achievement? For 5 years, Mr. Bills has taught 8th graders at the Health Sciences Academy. This year, while operation of the Health Sciences Academy has been impacted by COVID-19, he is supporting students as a full-time launch teacher. Mr. Bills is one of more than 70 exceptional American teachers who will travel abroad next year as part of the Fulbright Teachers Program. Recipients of the Fulbright grants are selected on the basis of both academic and professional achievement, as well as their record of service and their demonstrated leadership potential. As a member of the 2020 program, Mr. Bills will complete a graduate-level global education online course, attend a professional learning workshop, and join his cohort to travel into the summer of 2021 for an international field experience. The 2-week trip will empower Fulbright Fellows by providing the opportunity to observe classrooms and co-teach their own lessons with international educators. Please join us in congratulating Mr. Bills.
Yes, we would love to hear
Yeah.
from you.
So I do really, I can take this off.
You won't get mine.
So I really appreciate the opportunity to be recognized in front of the board, and I'm really excited about some of these opportunities that are in front of me. One thing I wanted to say, though, as a new launch teacher, I don't know how much you're being informed of everything that's going on with launch over these last few weeks, but I really have to give a shout out to all the people that are involved in that program because they have done a tremendous job. I'm one of several hundred educators that have been recruited over the last few weeks to do all this online learning. It's a huge shift for everybody. They're doing it all over the state. I've got students in my classes from mid-Missouri, St. Louis area, Kansas City area, and it is just an amazing job that they're doing. So I really have appreciated all the support on that.
Thank you. We are proud of, yes, we are proud of you, and congratulations, and thank you for adapting for our kids.
Thank you.
Great, thanks for being here.
Yes.
So our final recognition for this evening is for Kim Keller, our Director of Nutrition Services. Mrs. Keller has been named Aramark Midwest Manager of the Year. And as you may know, Aramark is the national food service provider that SPS works with to meet the nutritional needs of our students. Kim, would you please come forward? Aramark presents this award to the director who demonstrates outstanding program management, client partnership, and peer leadership. Mrs. Keller was nominated by her district manager and then selected by the Aramark Midwest leadership team. There are more than 100 eligible directors in this category in Aramark K-12 locations across the Midwest region. Here is an excerpt from her nomination, which sums up Kim. Kim's energy and resilience are contagious, and she delivers excellence in any situation. This was very obvious when she orchestrated the production and delivery of the pandemic feeding process. Kim was passionate that every child would be nourished. Kim's ability to organize teams and communicate the goal is superior. From implementing breakfast in the classroom to changing the entire service model over spring break for pandemic meals, no stone was left unturned and no challenge was too large. Kim's efforts and her commitment to displaying integrity and respect do not go unnoticed, end quote. I think we can all agree that Mrs. Keller and her team do an amazing job every day to ensure that SPS students receive healthy and nutritious meals. Their dedication was especially evident during the pandemic as they prepared and distributed approximately 776,000 grab-and-go meals between March and July. Please join us in congratulating Mrs. Keller for this recognition.
Thank you, guys. Well, as you know, it takes more than a village. We have 230 employees that make this happen every day for all of our kiddos. So this really goes to all of them too, because they're amazing and they get up and do it every single day. Some of them get there at 5:30 in the morning, and we're handing out meals from 4 to 6 at night too. So it's all of them. It's all of us together that are making it happen. So couldn't do it without them. So we appreciate the opportunity to get to feed the kiddos anytime we can. So appreciate you guys.
Yes. Are there any remarks from the board for either recipient?
Well, I'll just say something quickly. For what I thought was amazing about our teachers, so we're honoring and recognizing him, that he gets in front of us and thanks us for a program that, while we're recognizing him, but he turns around recognizing all that kind of thing. So I thought that is the mark of such a great, a dedicated teacher. But then also, to Kim, we serve on another committee together, which we recently had a Zoom meeting. And so when Kim started telling about all the meals served and all the everything that's gone on with her department in the last, since March. I think on the Zoom meeting, heads were just kind of rolling because I don't think everyone could comprehend this.
It's a lot.
About
Yeah, it's a lot, but they're making it.
776,000 meals.
A lot of meals.
I mean, the folks outside the district were just kind of shaking their heads. It's mind-boggling what you're doing. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
More than worthy of this recognition.
Thank you very much.
You've been working hard for years, I know that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we appreciate it, and I love my job, so that makes it a lot easier. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that concludes our Honoring Excellence, so we'll continue with the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for our recipients who were able to be here tonight. Our next agenda item is to approve the agenda. The recommended action is that the board approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Bill? Somebody like to second that?
Second.
Carl? Any discussion? Hearing none. You can vote. Motion passes. Our next agenda item is public comments to address agenda items. The Board of Education welcomes comments from the audience about issues being discussed. It is recommended that requests to speak be submitted prior to the beginning of the meeting. Comments will be limited to 5 minutes for each speaker and will be timed by the board secretary. It is inappropriate to address the board about individual students or individual staff members by name in open meeting. If you have concerns about individuals, those concerns should be addressed through the appropriate administrative supervisors, either in the school or in the district office. The board uses this time in our meeting to listen to comments or concerns from the public, but will not comment or engage the public during this meeting. If you have materials you want to share, please provide them to the board secretary prior to the meeting, and she will distribute them to the board members. Kathy, we still just have one? Okay. We have one speaker for an agenda item, and that is Roy Holland. Roy, come on up. Good evening.
President Leonard and members of the board, this is an honor to follow the Dietary Department's supreme effort. I think the entire community has been very blessed, and it holds many families, not only the schools together, but it's a very core part of our everyday activities. So, if the year of COVID is not enough, certainly we had a superintendent change to it. And I'm reading the news stories, and we see things that request for qualification, draft a timeline at the next meeting, national search immediately. Has some urgency to it, but my key here today is just to say, hey, let's take our time, let's look at where we've been, what we think we need. My wife gives me a grocery list when I go to the store, and if you have yours ready, I think we'll do better. But as we look ahead, this is a big business. It costs a lot of money every year. And what has this district done in the past, and most recently for Dr. Jungmann's selection? I did come to know Dr. Ritter, and as we know, he came from Colorado Springs, a city that's 3 times our size. It's a complex mix of 4 to 5 other independent districts within the city, and also they have 30 charter schools and over 200 private schools, so a very complex situation. That district also, for identity, had 59% free and reduced lunch, 11 high schools, 30% Hispanics, and 54% of the students' grades were below state average. So there was lots of hurdles and lots of needs there. He came here, he had 5 years of experience, and he was over 50 years old. So I would say that he was indeed an experienced educator when he came, and he had a lot to offer. I know that this board hired him, worked with him for 8 years, and knew and came to know him very well. But then something changed, and we went through another cycle, and we selected a 37-year-old with 1 year of superintendent experience. I've learned from the releases, and one has to wonder, well, what changed along the way? But the point here is that this board needs to not be too excited about rushing ahead, but actually take time to look and see what's happened over the last 7 years. Some of the list you've heard before, but you know it well. Certainly, we mentioned the launch earlier. That everybody seems to think that's been a success. Starting earlier, the conversion of 9 elementary schools into open classroom models is questionable, and was judged as failures in a lot of places over the 80s and 90s, and might be on a questionable list. The hub concept for preschools had discussion in this boardroom, and that's where 4-year-olds were expected to ride on buses to go to an out-of-neighborhood site, and that was Campbell. We started with that. and has since faded by the parents in not using it much. And now we also have sites actually moved out to the neighborhoods for Gray and Harrison. But Northsiders still are going to be asked to travel somehow to the hubs at Williams, Boyd, and then the Fulbright out on the west side. So that's something for your grocery list. What do we want to do with that? What about the 8th grade math scores? We've been over those. When can we turn that around? And there may be other reasons what newcomers to Springfield look for when they come to judge the school system. And you are in everyday competition with the neighboring districts, as you well know and need to remember. So we need to also keep track of our rising free and reduced lunch and the concern across the community with poverty. In the last 20 years, we've gone up 20%, and you well know that we need to turn that around. We don't want to end up like Kansas City and St. Louis. So April will soon be here, and there will be a board election, and also public sentiment now, I think, indicates that there is support for legislative change of our current system. I do, and many others consider it to be an antiquated system.
Well, your time is up now. So
Okay, thank you.
Thank
It
you.
needs to be changed. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. Our next agenda item is consent agenda minutes. The recommended action is that the board approve consent agenda items 3.01 through 5.01. Would somebody like to make that motion?
So moved.
Jill, would somebody like to second that?
Second.
Okay, Jerry, any discussion? Seeing none, we are prepared to vote. Motion passes. The next agenda item is our treasurer's report, and Carol Embry will come to the podium.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So for your review in advance of the meeting, we provided you with our standard reports. And I'll highlight for you some of the items that also appear on the treasurer's report. And that is that our fund balance percentage changed, including the budget amendment and transfer information provided to you this evening for consideration, will shift our ending fund balance projection at the end of June from 16.77% to 16.59%. So that is a slight change. The budget amendments include an adjustment relative to the assessed valuation and the levy setting that just occurred recently, and that would be on the revenue side. And then also we have some slight changes of $34,733 on expenditures. So we also had a state career and technical education enhancement grant, and that's included on both the revenue and the expenditure side. Total revenue reduction is $797,062, and as you know, until we receive our revenues in January, we won't know exactly where that will land. So we could see that rise back up again. So that would be a highlight there. Our financial audit for the 2019-2020 fiscal year will occur in the upcoming weeks. Actually, Westbrook & Company will perform their field work October 1st through 2nd. And in keeping with our practice, we will be bringing them to you for their full report to you in either November or December, depending on scheduling availability. And that concludes the information. I know you've received it multiple times. We continue to celebrate with our bond financial reports that are provided to you, and Dr. Shaw has provided you with that update, and we'll provide you information again this evening about our ability to advance the York project due to savings from other construction bids. So we're continuing to monitor the progress on that, and that concludes the information I have for you. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those.
Yes, thank you, Carol. Any questions for Carol at this point before I read the recommended action? Okay, seeing none, the recommended action is that the board approves the treasurer's report as presented.
We'll make that motion.
Denise will make the motion, Charles will second it. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we are ready to vote. Motion passes. Our next agenda item is information and reports, and we have no information reports for tonight. Our next agenda item is board policy 8.01, and these were presented to us for first read at the study session, and we've all had a chance to read those over the course of the last couple weeks and get any questions answered. So I will see if there's any discussion or any questions before I read the recommended action.
I have a question.
Okay.
Regarding the sexual harassment under Title IX revision or whatever it's called here. Do we have any guidance from legal counsel?
We do, and that's a great question, and both Jill and Carol and Penny are prepared to answer that. Yes. Who would like to take that? Penny, do you want to start?
Certainly. So, guidance from legal counsel.
Yeah, particularly regarding some of the concerns that MSBA had in this document about some of the wording.
So the document is MSBA's document based upon the requirements of the regulation, and there are concerns about the content and the regulation and how it really will play out both in particularly K-12 but higher ed setting as well. But it is the law of the land at present. It's being challenged in court presently, and it might change. But the policy that we have before us tonight is what the law requires, and that really the largest struggle is some of the structures that are set up. It's more like a court hearing and a back and forth conversation. Might not work well in a K-12 setting, particularly when we're dealing potentially with some younger students that you have to have that conversation with. And it does require that we have different levels and different individuals involved in that process. We're currently under Board Policy AC. We have one person designated as our compliance officer, and that will continue to be the case with Policy AC. That will continue to be the CHRO position. But when it comes to sexual harassment, we now have this multi-layered approach, and we have identified how that will flow, and that will be with that Executive Director of Student and School Services serving as the Title IX coordinator, and then we'll have an investigator on the student side, an investigator on the staff side, and then the decision maker will be the CHRO, and the appellate will be the district's legal counsel as currently outlined. If that process is amended to be more appropriate for a K-12 setting, then we'll come back to you with a proposal that is more appropriate, meeting the requirements of any revised federal regulation or court decision that might tell us we need to look at it a little differently.
It's from my reading, and I'm no legal person, but from my reading, it sounded like some of the concerns were also about some of the protections that were given to the staff member that could potentially be harmful for a child, perhaps, I don't know. I just wanted to be clear about what the concern was and how we deal with that.
Well, I think part of the concern, part of the protection is that you can have this conversation back and forth to give everyone an opportunity to be heard, and then there might be a need to provide some supports in the interim and what those might need to look like for both the person who has the concern and then the person who might be alleged to have committed some wrongful act. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of flexibility in how we're going to manage that. The regulation says you shall do these things, and so I think we'll just have to be mindful and work through age-appropriate, just as we do with any of our instruction, age-appropriate methods involving the appropriate staff persons with that, parents with those conversations when it needs to be involved, and then we'll have to carefully monitor as a district how those might need to be adjusted moving forward.
And this is again just my ignorance of the law, but it sounded like there were protections. They spelled out protections for the complainant. It sounded like in this particular case, the complainant being a teacher. What about if the complainant is a child and the protections, particularly about not reprimanding and not having, any reprimands? And what happens if, we can't reprimand? It said that you can put them on administrative leave, but what happens if the complainant is a child? They can't go on administrative leave.
So it's more like retaliation is what we're talking about here, retaliatory conduct. And so what we'll have to do is we'll have to look at each of those instances and determine has there been some sort of retaliatory conduct by anyone toward the person who complained or by one party against the other. And it may be that there needs to be some sort of separation between those parties. We'll have to work through that delicately. It might be that one has to be removed from a particular school setting. It's very fact intensive when you do that. But we also have to safeguard the rights of both parties because both have, if we're talking about students, both have a right to an education.
Right.
And nothing's been proven when you're in that investigative phase.
Right.
And so we have to identify how we can support both fairly through that process while giving them access to educational opportunities. We currently have to do that under board policy AC as well. It just, the new requirements have some specificity about what that can and cannot look like, where policy AC really left that discretion up to the district.
Thank you for that explanation.
My concern is less with the policy than guidance or the law with which our policy has to be compliant. I mean, I do have concerns that in the investigative phase, there are protections, I don't like air quotes, but protections that I think could make it much more likely to dissuade someone from making a complaint. But again, that's not a flaw of the policy. It strikes me as a flaw of the guidance with which we have to be compliant. So we have to approve it ultimately to be compliant, but we don't have to like it. Well, I don't.
That's correct, but we still have board policy AC, and so we may have complaints that don't rise to the level or individuals won't bring under ACA because that is the most extreme of the situations that we're dealing with. But it still could be inappropriate, it could still be sexual in nature, and we could still use our policy AC process to get to some of those concerns, even if an individual doesn't come forward and file a written complaint. We may be able to tackle it under our already existing policy AC. The results could be a little bit different, but we do have that avenue still available for us.
I think ensuring a climate of mutual respect and free of harassment, et cetera, is the ultimate goal here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. The recommended action is that the board adopt all policies as presented. So moved. Jill will make that motion. I'll make a second. Denise will second it. Any discussion? Okay, we're ready to vote. Motion passes. Our next agenda item is new business, and the first agenda item is superintendent search process. I'm going to ask Carol to upload a couple slides to the screen. She also has a handout for each board member.
Thank you.
You're doing great, thank you. I've got my copy, yes. Thank you. Our colors and complicated. So at this point, our community is well aware that our board received Dr. Jungmann's retirement announcement in closed session at our board meeting last time. And I know you all join me as board members in appreciating Dr. Jungmann's thoughtfulness in signaling his retirement so that we may begin the search process in a timely manner during this school year. With that in mind, our first step is to initiate the RFP process to potentially hire an executive firm to help guide us and assist us in this process. You all have had a chance to provide feedback to Denise and I on the RFP that you have in front of you, and Carol just passed that out, the white stapled. And so we appreciate your feedback on that and have made those adjustments. This document has been loaded into board documents as well, and we are ready to move forward with that. You have a copy in front of you of our timeline, but before we move to that slide, I'm just going to review for the public to be aware of what the RFP will look like and the elements that that includes. And up on the screen, it includes our recruitment and selection of candidates, stakeholder input, marketing of the position, screening applicants, and evaluation of the applicants and general support. And those details can be further read in the uploaded RFP document in board docs. If you want to, you've got the clicker right there. There you go.
How about I just do this?
How about you just do it, right?
How about I do that?
Okay. So the what we see, board members, at the end of the RFP is the timeline there. So if you want to turn to that, you also are seeing it on the screen. The RFP will and proceed to move forward tomorrow with that being posted on the STS website. The submission for deadlines, or any questions for those people who are interested in filling out that proposal, will be October 1st. Any type of post responses to the questions in the district e-bidding system will need to take place by the 5th of October, and the submission deadline is October 12th by 2 p.m. Central Time. The evaluation committee will review the responses to identify any potential finalists and seek clarification from those who have put forth a recommendation on either the 12th or the 13th of October. On the 19th, there will be a presentation of those to be interviewed from those who were potentially selected if requested. On the 20th, the board then, that is our next full board meeting, will then, through contract approval, hire the executive search firm, and then moving forward pretty quickly after that contract approval, we'll implement the search process with the firm. Clarification on the evaluation committee. Bruce and Jill have both volunteered to be the third participant with Denise and I to review those proposals, and so we will figure out between Bruce and Jill, because we only can have three, between Bruce and Jill, based on what times work best for the three of us, which one of you will have the opportunity to then work through those.
And we were struggling with the math you were doing.
Yes.
That seemed a whole lot like 4 people.
We do not have to figure out the time right now, but I'm just.
But are you saying that I'm going to do some and Bruce is going to do some?
No.
Or one or the other of us will do
I'm
it?
saying based on the time on the 12th or 13th that we all have available,
Got you.
one of you will join. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay.
You'll figure it out later and you're going to pick straws.
No. Yes. Okay. Next slide. This is the potential timeline of the search, and you all have this on with your blue paper in front of you. The first part of that has already been discussed. Let's move forward to November of 2020, or back up to October 2020. The board, during open session meeting, will select, with the selected firm, will process through and set expectations of the search, establish the calendar, identify the marketing plan, and other criteria. November through March are tentative times. We will not know these exact times until a firm potentially is hired and they help with our input. We are simply providing a general timeline so that the public can see this is generally what happens during a search process. November would be community input sessions with stakeholder groups. December, stakeholder group input report back to the board. And special open session meetings will be scheduled to continue to update the interview process. December, DOE executive session meeting to receive applicants from the search firm. January, DOE executive session meeting for update from the firm on the search. February, DOE executive session meeting interviewing candidates. And by March 2021, community engagement opportunity with a finalist, and DOE vote to hire new superintendent.
Have we made the commitment that there will only be one finalist, or is that, could be potentially two finalists? We could have community engagement?
Yes, I understand the question on the grammar, but
Yeah.
I think it's just a general timeline.
Okay, I know in some searches they select one finalist and it's sort of a fait accompli. But we don't have to resolve that now, but I just wanted to make sure that wasn't necessarily the expectation.
I would say that we as a board haven't gotten to that point in scoping out our process.
Okay.
So, this is, our next step is moving forward tomorrow with posting the RFP. And from there, you all see the timeline. And the only thing that's probably for sure is until the October 20th meeting, those dates are firmed up, and you all are aware of those dates and have some of those new dates on your calendar already. And then we will move forward with getting more specific on the actual full timeline of the process. So we will learn more at our October 19th special meeting on that Monday night, where we will hear from potentially different firms. We have to wait to see if anybody applies, and then learn more and discuss as a board at that point. Any comments before we move on to our next agenda item? Okay, hearing none, we will move forward with our 9.02 Transportation Expansion Project. That brings Carol to the podium.
So I'm going to take us down memory lane just a bit. Let me switch to this other presentation. I'm pulling up for your benefit the transportation update that was provided to you May 19th, 2020, during the regular meeting that occurred then. And basically, at that point in time, we summarized for you the journey that had taken a bit. I won't talk as extensively about this information, but I want to help you recenter on what you had learned previously so that you may discuss this moving forward. So just a reminder, Missouri statute allows that students only must live 3.5 miles from school to be eligible for transportation. And local boards have the authority to set that closer. So many school districts do set it closer. We have a 3.5 mile distance requirement. They must live at least 3.5 miles in order to qualify. And that is for our high school students at this point in time. Prior to this year, we did have a 1.5 mile distance for elementary and middle school, and you will recall that for the budget process for the approval for this year, that was modified down to 1 mile for our elementary students. So we're currently at 1 mile for elementary, 1.5 miles for middle school, but we are 3.5 miles for high school students. This reminds you of all the routes and the buses and the miles that we drive each year. And again, this data points back to the 2018-2019 school year. We have in excess of 200 employees. Our ridership is approximately 30%, and this is all pre-COVID, so obviously that has changed for the current year, but just over 7,600 students for both the fall and the spring. And that's the process by which DESE pays us funds. They take 2 counts a year and use that. This reminds you of our costs. So while we are spending or have approximately $9.6 million in allowable costs as of the FY19 year, the state authorized amount is 5.8, but then they further reduced that so that the local reimbursement for us was only $1.9 million. So for that year, we were $3.9 million underfunded of what would be authorized for reimbursement. And this amount typically increases each year. It does take money away from our local instructional expenditures. On the other hand, early childhood special ed, dollar for dollar reimbursement. So when we do expand services for those littles, we are also being able to provide them with transportation as needed. So who's writing? This slide shows you the breakdown by elementary, middle, and high school. But what's more important is, does bus eligibility impact attendance? And we shared with you that we see a 2.8% gap at the high school level between students who are eligible to ride and students without transportation services. So it is a noticeable gap between those grades, whereas you see those other grade levels are basically the same, whether they are provided transportation or not. And I shared with you previously that instruction is our focus. We do know there's a financial impact, an estimated $700,000 state revenue for the additional 2.8% of time if we had increased attendance. Okay, so we would see a revenue increase on the attendance side. This slide showed you again the gap for high school, and I'll move forward. These slides, as a reminder, the red indicates not eligible for bus transportation, but this is old news because you reduced that down to 1 mile now. So we would see more of this map that we produced for you in May turn away from the red. This shows you the middle level. We're at 1.5, so we do have students that are closest to those middle schools who do not have transportation. This shows you our high school gap. The red represents students not eligible for transportation. So as a reminder, in FY18 and FY19, we've talked about this a multitude of times relative to Focus Area 1 and Focus Area 2 reports of our strategic plan, or sorry, Focus Area 3. And subsequently, we have added Focus Area 5. There were pieces of Focus Area 5 embedded within Focus Area 1 about equity and providing access for kids. And so if I were providing this report to you in full now, I would add Focus Area 5 because it's about providing an equal level of services for all kids, regardless of their under-resourced situation they may experience. It was in August of 2019 that we did a request for proposal for a transportation analysis. Fast forwarding January 21, they provided you that update. And in February, on the 4th at that board meeting and on the 18th, and then finally May 19th when I provided you this report, we revisited the information. And it was at the May 19th meeting that you discussed the cost, the likely cost, and gave us the move forward opportunity for administration to pursue this. This reminds us of our peer comparison, for statewide peers. Springfield, again, elementary 1.5. You can see our statewide peers, most of them are at a 1 mile. And now we have aligned to that. On the high school level, we are at 3.5, where it's split. Some are 2 miles, some are 1 mile. There is a district that was 0.5 or more. Those students receive transportation. And then at the middle school level, again, we are at a greater distance at 1.5 compared to those peers. When we take a look at our regional peers, and that changes the game because we are an urban community, so they may have more of those country roads to navigate. But you can see that, again, we are the outlier when you look at our high school distance of 3.5 or more miles in order for a student to qualify for transportation. So at the January 21, 2020 board meeting, the consultant provided you information regarding how much it would cost based on the analysis of TransPAR. And the first point was moving high school boundaries from 1.5 to 3.5 miles could cost between $2.2 to $3.7 million. For the magnet services, and again, that's providing for those students that without transportation don't have the same opportunities for those instructional experiences. And that would cost approximately $1.7 million. And we have listed for you there the additional services locations. So overall, the cost for these services would be between $3.96 to $5.41 million if we did not make any changes to the tier structure. So the recommendation was basically that we would add a tier, and so that's adding another loop for those same buses, those same drivers, to journey throughout our community to pick up students, with high school being one loop, middle school being another loop, and elementary being the third loop, compared to our two at the current time. So as you can see, this provides you at the bottom line the range of potential costs if we do add that additional loop or tier, go to a 3-tier system. It would still be, again, currently it's nearly $4 million to $5.4 million if we don't make changes, but if we do make changes, whether that would be middle school, then high school, then elementary, or high school, elementary, then middle school, whatever the decision would be made, it would cost between $848,000 to $1,028,000. Again, utilizing the FY19 data. And all of this was developed with assumptions made relative to how many students would participate. So we provided you with the additional start time sequencing comparison. And again, we're currently using, at that time, about 132 buses. And this slide reminds us that we know we have a multitude of considerations to make. This will have a parent impact. This will have an employee impact. This will have a partnership impact for those before and after school programming. It will certainly impact students, and that includes our athletics, our extracurricular, our co-curricular activities. So we shared with you next steps, and this provides you with the summary of all of that, again, we were recommending for the current fiscal year that we would change from 1.5 to 1 miles for our elementary students, and that was affecting approximately 700 kids, and that did happen and was implemented. Early childhood access would continue based on the pilot that we had generated previously, and then alternative programming changes would also be implemented that would create some savings. So the total cost of that was $125,000. This slide showed you what would happen when we change from 1.5 to 1 mile for elementary. You can see much of the red has disappeared from there, so students are closer to their buildings. And then this shows you our early childhood ridership boundaries. Very little red in that situation. We said that we would recommend that we would move forward by deploying a work group process. So we know we can't do this expansion in isolation. We need to engage with parents and staff, teachers, and others in the community, and so we would work on kicking that off. It says group would kick off in August with the goal of providing a recommendation to administration by November 15th. We have been a little delayed due to other important items that have come our way through COVID and the changes that we had to make for instruction. So again, our primary focus is expanding ridership access for high school students, grades 9 through 12, and then increasing the magnet expansion. This slide shows you the what if. What if we did change from 3.5 for high school down to 1.5, and that eliminates a significant amount of the red or no bus service provided area. This is a summary of part of the work that we would be doing. So indeed, we would deploy the 3rd tier. We would also be affecting start and end times. You can't add a new tier without affecting start and end times. The other items here included things like, well, we need to take a look at how the buses loop through different areas. Will we have more congestion? Will we have less congestion? And a lot of that is really unknown because we don't know what behaviors of parents might be through this process, but what capital investments might we need to make. And we ultimately would outline a recommendation for implementation. So all of this work would be done behind the scenes and then brought to you as a budget recommendation for the 2021-2022 school year for implementation that August of 2021. And know that there would be a lot more information relative to the budget and other items for consideration. We have discussed identifying a work group and potentially having members of the community serve, much like we did for the Community Task Force and also for the Equity and Diversity Advisory Council. We are recommending for you this evening, though, that we would have this consultant. It would be the same gentleman who presented to you the information from Transpar, who would come in to be the knowledge base for us in the event questions came up relative to some possible changes or questions in general about transportation and studies and that type of thing. So that would be the work of that individual. Brett Range, Dr. Brett Range, our Executive Director of Student Services, and myself have partnered together on developing out our project summary and timeline. And we, this may be news for Dr. Shaw in the room, but we would definitely be inviting him to the table, as well as Jonathan Sheldon, our Director of Transportation, and other leaders. We would include teachers and principals and a multitude of position types to ensure that we had all the right voices at the table. So that's the recommendation before you. I know that was fast and kind of takes you back to lots of discussions and meetings previously. If you have any questions for me, I would be happy to answer those.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. You know, I think about how busy you all are and how much is going on right now, and in some ways this seems like such like a top tier thing, not the basic work, but it's critically important, and I appreciate all the time and effort you put into this, because that's going to make a big difference for a lot of students. I hate that red and I want it to go away. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the $20,000, not to exceed $20,000, that's not for the contract for the, or for the group that's going to manage this project, or?
So the decision support group, they would be the expertise in the transportation arena, and Mr. Tim Ammons is a partner with that group, so he would attend however many meetings we would need him to attend. Our conversation actually centered on, it might be more towards the 14,000 area for, it depends on the number of meetings in which he would be asked to participate. Did I answer your question?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Carol?
Yeah, my concern, first of all, was if this work group was going to be similar to our previous two work groups. But when I saw consultant, I thought we were bringing somebody in to tell us what we ought to have, and then they would leave. I'm really, that to me didn't set well. I don't, you know, then we'll deal with what they have, and they're taking their money and going back to wherever they live. And I've seen too much of that now at the state level that I really didn't want that to happen. But Carol explained that this was, to me, better. Consultant is just kind of a bad word to me. An expert.
Expert, yes.
In transportation that we do not have locally. We don't have somebody with this expertise that this person would bring to the work group. Another way to handle it is have your work group, they have questions, and then you got an in-between person who calls that person who gives you the answer, and you come back, and that never works too well, I don't think. So that, and then she also said we'll have local people heading up the work group just like we've had before. So that took care of that one concern for me. The other concern is we're going to put this work group together, and that one slide that lists what they're going to have to do, I don't want to be on this group because look at the impact on academic programs for students, really, and impact on all the extracurricular, the impact on students, parents, district employees, and community. I think that's some impossible expectations. I don't think you can do that. So I think that should be revised because really our
my whole thing, and I agree with Jill, is the fact that we think if we can lower the miles, more students will come to school to be able to access education. And all the other will be speculation. That's all it's going to be. And we're going to ask people to come during this COVID epidemic and meet numerous times. And I think as a board we've said, or I have, I don't want to speak for anybody else, when they've met the diversity group and our other groups, I felt an obligation to follow their recommendation. They came, they got all the information. We asked them to meet for hours, and then we're going to, as a board, then say, I don't think I want to follow your recommendations. I feel a real obligation at that point in time to do what they would say, here's what we think is best. But the money part also is, I think we have to consider, because if it's going to be $1.5 million, that's going to be out of our operating expense, and it'll be continual money spent when at a time the state's withholding money from us. So next year's budget, if it's $1 million, is to say it's $1 million to do that, we're saying that's going to be a top priority over anything else that we might want to do. Once we commit to it, that means that's going to be a forever deal. You don't want to go back and say I'm cutting that. So I think during these financial times, we really have to think about that, because it also will affect capital expenses, which comes out of operating expenses. And if you drive the buses more miles, they'll break down earlier, and you're going to have to buy more buses, and you may have to build more better bus pickup places. And so the money situation during a time when they're withholding money also bothers me, because I don't know what my priority will be in January, because I have no idea what's going to happen between now and January. So I just think there are, but at the same time, it's the right thing to do. We spent money on a group that's come in and said, here's our recommendation. You're way behind on what you ought to be doing on picking kids up. But it just seems like, to me, there ought to be something else in here, that if they come back with a recommendation and all of a sudden the budget starts being developed in January and February and the state says we're not going to fully fund the formula, we're going to do some more withholding, that this maybe couldn't happen. And it just, I think there needs to be something in there that, and that needs to be changed, but something in there, because we're in such a crazy time that if we commit to doing that, there may be other priorities for, you start talking about millions of dollars. I just really, I don't want to not do it. I don't want to not have the committee, but at the same time, I don't want to feel a commitment that if they say, here's the best plan and it's $1 million, then I feel obligated to go ahead and place that ahead of other things that I have no idea what those will be.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Denise has signaled that she has a comment.
Thanks,
And then
Sharita.
Yeah.
So in listening to what Bruce had to say, I'm thinking back and remembering the number of speakers that came to talk to us about, I mean, they were very passionate to talk to us about the need for transporting their children, mostly might have been 10th graders, to school, and the difficulties they had with getting the kids to school because of situations or whatever. So I know that it's a real need for a number of our families, and something that we were very concerned about, trying to find a way to make that better. And I know some of us have talked about that that's been discussed by this board before many of us were on this board. And having, and listening to what Bruce had to say, having served on both task force, facilities task force, and our Equity and Diversity Advisory Council, I think one of the things that it was clear in both of those hardworking, very hardworking, dedicated groups is that they were going to be providing recommendations to the board, and the board would do what they could based on funding piece. And so I think folks are very understanding. They're very appreciative of the opportunity to get to wade into this and help us, with some of the details. I think, Bruce, you already outlined the projected impact on academic programs for students whenever you were kind of going over, talking about what that would mean for kids. But I think that, and I know that especially on the task force for facilities, because they made some really big decisions, but yet every meeting was knowing that this might not happen. And we knew all that was based on if we could pass bond. And so they were all very, I think, and I can speak for folks having been at every one of those meetings, that they were very passionate about that, but yet knowing that the board would have the final say. And I think same with the EDAC, that knew that those were great recommendations, and they certainly wanted the board to take them seriously and try to put them in place. And I think this similar work group, I think this group would work the same. I really like the idea of having an expert in the room to answer questions at the time, because I know that was the one thing about task force. So we had questions come forward, and we had to wait our meeting 2 weeks later to have Carol or Travis or someone to go out and find those answers and bring them back, which made that a little bit more time consuming. But I think that folks would jump on this, could get a lot of these, maybe not get the answers, but at least do what's there, which is outline and discuss projected impacts. Not say exactly this is what's going to happen, but this is how it might impact some of our programs. But I certainly would love to see us be able to pick up our high school students that are currently struggling to find rides to school from 3.5 miles to learn.
Just to clarify what I think I heard you state earlier, that if we have an increase in attendance, we also get an increase in revenue.
We do.
Not include, cuts that they're withholding money, or will we still get an increase based on increase in attendance?
The baseline revenue would be increased. Any cuts that are experienced statewide would be applied to all baseline revenue sources for all districts.
Also, in what we will be voting on now is for the contract. It's not about voting on work group structure, formatting, or any of that.
Right. That would be something that administration would handle behind the scenes, much like we handled the community task force and equity and diversity process. We would definitely be bringing back to you a formal recommendation from the group and from administration regarding the budgetary impact.
So,
You're right. Tonight's vote is just to approve contract
Correct.
experts to be a part of the work group.
So again, because I was on the EDAC one, I was not on the facilities one, there was always a person from the district who was leading that charge, and they presented to the board the final proposal, and it was approved by the board. So who is the person who's going to make the recommendation to the board?
I would anticipate that I would provide the recommendation potentially, or it could be Dr. Range or Dr. Shaw or the three of us together.
But not the expert.
It would not be the expert, no. Their work would be the behind the scenes, supporting the work group process and being able to answer those questions at the time.
So then it will be the work group responsibility, similar to how Ronnie had to do to synthesize what happened in the work group to come to a consensus about what recommendations touch forward.
That is correct.
Good question. Yep.
And I think that's an important distinction, that the expert, not the entity formerly referred to as a consultant, right? That person.
Correct.
My first thought was I had a little bit of heartburn at the size of the contract for an expert, but if in fact he or she is able to accomplish all of these things, that will probably be a pretty good deal. My only reservation, and this is one, it's not an in-principle objection, my only reservation is the expert needs to be able to identify the right questions to ask and to provide answers, but not to have the answers in mind before he or she suggests questions.
Certainly.
And given the connection to the first stage of that, that's always something of which we need to be aware. I would just say that, and it makes sense to me. And I also share Bruce's concern a little bit about, well, what if we get an extraordinarily impressive set of recommendations, and as is entirely possible, the money isn't there, or at least not all of it, and we have to make other difficult choices. That is certainly a possibility, and I think Denise is right when she says that we always go into these things with the expectation that as resources permit, right, and all of those kinds of things. But I guess I would prefer to be in the situation of having the recommendations we would like to implement and not be able to do it all right now, but have them in hand anyway. I mean, it's possible the money won't be there. That may turn out to be the case. But I guess I would prefer not to assume on the front end that it will automatically turn out to be that way.
And I would say no different than the Community Task Force recommendation, where there were 3 phases basically identified and prioritized by those members. That same approach could be something that would be recommended in this situation, that dependent on the budgetary appetite or ability to conform to that need, we could have a phased-in approach where, okay, so this year maybe it goes to 2 miles or whatever the case might be.
Yeah, and the last thing I would say is, the original timeline was August to sometime in November for all of this. Frankly, that seemed really, really ambitious in and of itself. The fact that we're now kind of in late September, I don't think November is even viable with all of these things in there.
As August has moved, so has November. So we are now thinking it's more of a January. Likely it could be a December discussion, but more likely January, just in time for budgetary conversations.
I think that will still be a stretch, but that would be ideal.
Okay. Thank you, board members. Thank you, Carol, for your presentation and for answering that and for clarifying what we are simply voting on tonight, and as well as what we have to look forward to in the future. The recommended action is that the board approve the contract as presented. Would somebody like to make that motion? Jerry, would somebody like to second that? Second. Denise, any discussion before voting? Okay, seeing none, we're ready to vote. Motion passes. Next agenda item is unfinished business. The first item, and as you recall, all of these unfinished business items, we heard presentations at our study session meeting. Therefore, there's no need for anyone to come up at this time. I will simply flow through the recommended actions, and you can stop us if there's any discussion needed. The first recommended action is that the board approve the local model compliance plan for special education as presented.
So moved.
Charles?
Second.
Rita, second. Any discussion? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Motion passes. Next agenda item is medical stop-loss coverage. Recommended action is that the board approve the recommendation for stop-loss coverage as presented. So moved. Jill?
Second.
Charles will second it. Any discussion before we vote? Seeing none, we are ready to vote. Motion passes. Next agenda item is go-to-market resolution. Recommended action is that the board approve the resolution authorizing the offering for sale of general obligation bonds of the school district of Springfield R12 as presented. Somebody like to make that motion? Denise?
Second.
Sarita with a second. Any discussion before we vote? Seeing none, we are ready to vote. Motion passes. Next agenda item is bond 2019 bond project updates and actions, which brings Travis up to the podium for our first change orders and agreements. Good evening, Travis.
Good evening. So before you have the normal change order and agreement chart, you can see there's just a few items tonight, which is always good news. The total for this evening's change orders and agreements is $34,756.71. We have a variety of some design elements. We have some construction items, and as well as some additional furniture, fixtures, and equipment for the 3 different projects that you see below.
Right. Pretty short compared to what we're used to. Since we get them every board meeting, we just, right, that's right. Thank you for outlining these. Any questions for Travis before we read the recommended action?
Travis, just for my benefit, I always appreciate an update on the construction progress of the Sunshine and Fulbright in Delaware, how they're moving along at this point. I know we had some delays.
Sure. So Fulbright, we are wrapping up, should have been about today or yesterday, finalizing sod on the backside where we had to wait on that because of the storm damage, so that we can then start doing the playground, and then all of those things will be wrapped up. Delaware, we're dealing with just some final items that we've got some issues with the electrical things not working correctly, just some little things that linger. So we're working on all of those final documents. We're hoping within the next 2 weeks to no more than a month, we get final documentation done and close that project out. Sunshine furniture was delivered today, or I'm sorry, yesterday. Is being installed over the next 2 weeks in the classrooms and offices. The architects and the construction team, as well as owner representatives, are doing punch list items throughout the building. The plan as we speak is still that we should be able to move in on the 5th, move in on the 2nd, start school on the 5th. The one item that would hold that up is if the construction team did not achieve the temporary certificate of occupancy. We've had a couple inspections that have taken place already this week. There's 5 of them that have to pass, and then a list of some things that the Building Development Service didn't think there was going to be any issues. So they're very confident that that will happen, and we hope to achieve that within a few days. So we're being very optimistic. There's a lot of work taking place right now, and so assuming that everything continues to happen as the contractors tell us it will over the next 2 weeks, then we should be good to go on the 5th.
Thank you, Travis.
I'm glad somebody really kept close track and we didn't start demolishing Portland. So I'm really grateful for that, even though it's not ideal. It could have been worse, much worse. But with Williams at Hill Sherwood, with Boyd, the other new construction, and Boyd's going to be Boyd, and Jarrett will be at Jarrett. If those same things could happen, I mean, we don't know. Could be other things. I remember all the way back to Central when the steel couldn't be delivered or produced or something, that it's out of our hands. Those dates are far enough in advance that students could stay where they are and not be affected.
Right, we had that same scenario this past summer because, if you remember, the Delaware students were in Old Sherwood, and so we delayed the demolition at Williams, knowing that that's where they were going, to ensure that Delaware would be completed to where we could start school. Once we had that assurance, then we made that decision to move forward. So we'll do the same thing. We'll evaluate those projects when we get to that point to where we wouldn't obviously tear down the York building without knowing that those students at Williams were going to be able to go back into their new school.
So we've got enough leeway that should that happen again, we have a place for the students to go.
those Boyd students won't go
Yeah.
anywhere until we know that
So
building
with
is done.
Boyd's done.
Garrett the same way.
We'll get into sunshine on the 2nd. Teachers, set up the rooms on the 3rd and 4th, and the kids show up on the 5th, at least today. That's the plan.
That's the plan right now, yes, sir. We'll move a lot of the teacher items on the 30th. They'll have all of their things boxed up, ready to go. They'll only keep what they need to teach on that Thursday, Friday. And so the bulk of their things will be moved to where the only thing they have to bring with them is what they needed on those 2 days. And then finalizing, setting up, and then be ready to start on the 5th.
We should wear jeans and sneakers that day and be ready in the lobby. Help, right?
On which day?
Day for the movie.
Well,
Being silly, Travis.
we
You don't have
don't
to
really need more people on site to help.
Okay, that was a no. You just got to
We need the right people, Jill.
As a spouse of an elementary teacher, I would want to be nowhere near school on the 3rd. I just get in the way. They are a machine.
Forward.
Wow. Harsh, man.
Okay.
No more comments from me.
Moving us forward with change orders, which is our current topic. The current recommendation is that the board approve the change orders and agreements as presented. Would somebody like to make that motion?
So moved.
Charles, is there a second?
Second.
Rita, any discussion before we vote? We're ready to vote then. Motion passes. Next agenda item, which is a little more interesting, is the Jarrett Middle School construction bid. Travis.
So very pleased to bring to you tonight the Jarrett Middle School construction bid. Those bids were received on September the 10th, and we did receive 5 separate bids from general contractors, which again, I think that's the least that we've received on any project. So we continue to get high competition, high interest on our projects, which always is great for the bids themselves. As a reminder, this project does have a total budget of $41,540,000 with a construction budget of just under $33 million. There was a difference in the low and the high bid of about 10%, and the low responsible bidder on that date was Branco Enterprises with a total bid of $32,078,000, which did include 5 separate alternates. So I wanted to point out, and I did so in the board documents, that part of construction on this project is also the asbestos abatement for Portland Elementary, as well as the demolition of Portland Elementary. And you can see those total close to $200,000. So even with the construction bid of just over $32 million, a couple $100,000 for those items, we're starting out well underneath our budget that we estimated for construction. Those 2 items, the demolition and the abatement, have already been approved by the board in previous meetings. So the recommendation would be to approve the construction contract with Branco Enterprises for a total of $32,078,000.
Just as a reminder, this is not a construction management.
Correct. This is what we call a hard bid.
Correct. Okay.
Design, then they...
We've seen different bids come
Correct.
forward, so I'm just clarifying. Okay. Any questions for Travis before we read the recommended action? Okay. Recommended action is that the board approve the construction contract as presented.
So moved.
Jill. Second. Denise with a second. Any discussion before voting? Seeing none, we're ready to vote. Motion passes. The next agenda item is public comments to address non-agenda items. The Board of Education will allow comments on topics not related to the printed agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes for each speaker and will be timed by the board secretary. It is inappropriate to address the board about individual students or individual staff members by name in open meeting. If you have concerns about individuals, these concerns should be addressed through the appropriate administrative supervisors, either in the schools or in the district office. The board uses this time in our meeting to listen to comments and or concerns from the public, but will not comment or engage with the public during this meeting. If you have materials that you want to share, please provide them to the board secretary prior to speaking, and she will distribute them to the board members. Sorry. I'm going to have to drink some water. Sorry.
Take a sip. Happy I have one person.
Okay. Tim Havens, you can make your way to the podium, please. Thank you.
That's what I meant. No, I just. Thank you, though.
Good evening, Tim.
You okay?
Yes, I'm going to make it.
Oh, you already started. I'm thinking about the officer at the door and his status and his obligations. Do the officer and Dr. Youngman have the same idea about the scope of work and authority of the officer's job? The constitutions, both the U.S. and Missouri, the Sunshine Law, and the officers sworn in oath of office to serve the public and protect the constitutions guarantee the public the right to be at a public meeting. How does this stack up with Dr. Youngman and the officer's conception of the officer's limits and duties? At the meeting on 8/2/20, a man was laid hands on and shoved toward the door by the officer on duty at the command of Dr. Youngman. This assault preceded by a yell of officer, officer, and a raised arm and a hand motion. The officer, when asked after the meeting to shed some light on his actions, revealed his thinking about his job, allegiances, and the Constitution. The officer explained, it's Dr. Youngman's building. If he says you're out, you're out. If you come to the next meeting and he says you're out again. Then the officer said it was a privilege for a citizen to be in the meeting, not a right. Do you not see that it is a right, not a privilege? Because of the Sunshine Law and the Constitution, it is a right, period. The officer's opinion that Dr. Youngman is the controlling authority is wrong also. The officer is commissioned. He has a burden because of his oath of office. Dr. Youngman does not own police power. He cannot buy his own police force obedient to him. The fact that the officer obeyed a hand signal like a bird dog without question shows a lack of the necessary assessment by the officer, the lack of independence. The officer's oath is to protect and serve the public. He owes Dr. Youngman nothing except for his time to just be here. He does owe the public something, however, fairness and protection of the constitutional rights. Both Dr. Youngman and the officer have an illegal misconception of their roles under the law. School board members take an oath too. Don't you remember? To the Constitution. What about your ethics to watch a violation occur and then say nothing? This would be a good study session for our students to see the American way in practice. In your instructions to the public sheet you hand out, your attempt to limit the free speech of the public is unconstitutional, as this has been court tested all across the United States. So knock it off. You're unethical, you violate people's rights, and you're too arrogant to apologize. You stick with your weenie school board rules over the Constitution. What are you going to do? Ask the cop to remove me because you don't like free speech?
Okay, Tim.
You just go south.
Thank you, Mr. Havens. Your time is
You're
up.
welcome.
Good evening. Our next agenda item is administrative reports. And we have several of you on the table. Carol, would you like to start us off?
Certainly. So I have an opportunity to go to the podium to share a number of things, and I know that you're well aware of it, but just again, that appreciation for all the staff members working behind the scenes, whether it be in the business services area, operations area, human resources, a lot of work taking place. My only highlight for you beyond our regular reporting is referencing our CARES funding. So as you know, we received just over $6 million of CARES funding through the federal government's distribution process. And we also have opportunity to apply for a number of small grants for reimbursement purposes, whether that be for providing connectivity or access for students. And you had already made a commitment that that was important and we had moved forward with that, but we were able to actually submit some of those costs for reimbursement. So that's great news for us. We are also given an opportunity by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to apply for reimbursement when a decision was made that we would have transportation help deliver meals to kids during the shutdown period in the spring by deploying those buses and attendants to go out with those meals. We're able to submit for some reimbursement funds on that. And of course, there would be limited funding and it would be likely a prorated distribution process. I received a notification from Greene County, the $1,180,518 grant application that we submitted and have received. They're ready to distribute those funds. So again, helping us be reimbursed for some of the costs that we've experienced relative to the pandemic. So that concludes my report. I'm happy to pass it to my colleague, Ms. Rector.
And I have a very brief report. We are currently hiring in transportation, custodial services, and nutritional services, and you may have seen over the last several days highlights from our Reasons Why series, where our transportation department is highlighting drivers who are sharing in their own words of why they became bus drivers, and that will culminate tomorrow in a drive-through hiring event at the transportation department. It runs 11 to 1. And then again 5 to 7 tomorrow evening, where we will have drivers on hand to engage with applicants and talk with them about all the reasons why they became bus drivers, and applicants will have an opportunity to get on a bus, experience that, and to learn more about the opportunities there. So we would ask that you share that opportunity with individuals that may be of interest to them, those folks who may want to become drivers in our system. And then on the 30th, we will be hosting a nutritional services and custodial hiring event at Delaware in the parking lot from 9 to 11. It too will be a drive-through hiring event. We will practice interviewing and engaging in a social distancing way with individuals who are interested in participating, getting involved in the district in one of those two areas. And for that event, particularly for nutritional services, we'll be highlighting what we're calling Meals for Miles, talking about that 776,000 meals served. And I don't have the number on the miles driven, but we will know that for that event. And so be looking for promotional information that'll be coming out about both our nutritional services and custodial event coming on the 30th of September, and encourage anyone you know who's interested in making a difference in the lives of students to apply for a position with the district.
We're looking forward to our ribbon cutting ceremony at Delaware Elementary, and that is on the calendar for Thursday, October 1st at 4:30. So we look forward to celebrating with the community and offering tours of that new facility. If you've not yet been through, it is just absolutely beautiful, so we look forward to that. And then we will follow that on Friday, October 2nd by hosting a naming ceremony for the Arthur Mallory Early Childhood Education Center. So two great opportunities for us to celebrate our facilities and their namesake. We are also very excited to celebrate 9 of our SPS seniors that have been named National Merit Scholar semifinalists from Central and Kickapoo, representing SPS, so very excited about that announcement. As far as engagement, we have a thought exchange that is open right now with our students, 9 through 12. We are seeking their input as part of our support of the Foundation for Springfield Public Schools and their strategic planning, their next strategic plan that they are currently developing. So we're asking students, what current unmet needs can the Foundation help you be successful, both in your 4 years in high school but beyond. So that is open right now, and we're looking forward to good engagement there. And then finally, as part of our recognition of employees, we continue to implement our theme for this school year, SPS Builds, throughout everything that we're doing. And we look forward to recognizing SPS builders throughout this school year. So any person in the school district that builds up lives and builds up our 25,000 students, and there are many different ways that happens. So we look forward to bringing you that first SPS builder for recognition by video and in person at the combined meeting in October.
So equity training continues on. We also have deployed our equity modules that we developed during a recommendation during the reentry process, and that's been sent out to all our certificated staff. And those modules will focus on social emotional learning from an equity lens, and then cultural consciousness in the classroom to focus on COVID-19 and the racial injustice that's currently taking place. So those are our updates that we have from our department.
Tanya just started Leadership 12 Class 40 today.
Yes, so I actually will be deferring to next year just because of being pregnant and trying to limit my, surroundings with other people, but I'm excited to be doing it next year for sure.
That's great. Thank you for that update.
I think that is the end of our administrative updates.
Okay, great. Moving on to legislative updates, and Dr. Jungman's not here to give us an update unless any the cabinet has any information, or Jerry wants to give us any comments. Okay, all right, we will move on.
Nothing going on.
I'm going to start coughing again. Our next agenda item is board comments.
Real quickly, just a quick reminder that the MSBA annual meeting will take place in the digital space this year, coming up at the end of this week. Some events on Thursday, but Friday and Saturday. Particular note, the keynote speaker in Friday early afternoon's second general session is, at least today, the head of the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Robert Redfield, speaking, as you might imagine, on COVID-19 and the impact that it had. That's 12:30 to 2 on Friday, and if you check your email, Kathy has reminded us all that we're all registered for this, so I would encourage you to log in. Although, since you are registered, these will all be taped and archived, and you'll have access to them for the full year, which I think is a really nice addition to it all. And the delegate assembly, where we will engage in delegate assembly kinds of things, that is on late Friday afternoon.
Yes, and we would love to hear what virtual sessions you're interested in attending so that we kind of know who's covering what topics and chiming in virtually. So that would be great. Thank you, Charles, for those updates. Our upcoming meetings, I think Stephen's covered the 2 ribbon cutting dates, and Charles has covered the MSBA. We have our board study session October 6th, and that's on our calendar. Mr. Nick's Inclusive Playground Ribbing, again, mentioned on October 7th at 9 a.m. at McBride. Any other comments or upcoming meetings that we haven't mentioned? Okay, our next agenda item is Plus Delta. If you want to make any comments on tonight's meeting, please write that on a sticky note and hand that to our board secretary before leaving. This is an unusual meeting where we have no executive session to go to. So we actually get to adjourn the meeting during the actual this meeting. That's right. That's right. So the recommended action is that the board move to that the board meeting adjourn. So moved. Jill. Second. Rita, second. Any discussion? Guessing there is not. We are ready to vote.
It's not a close one.
Better not be. Motion passes. Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you for